Chapter 7:16. Wright didn't react to the sudden knock on the door, but Zhang Lu, and was startled. He raised his voice. "Who is it?" "Brother," and the voice outside was Zhang Lu, and's number one subordinate, XNZ. At this time, Yen Fun on the bed seemed to be moaning and cursing a notch higher. Zhang Luan's face was inexplicably hot, and he shouted back in a rough voice, "What are you shouting for? Don't you see I'm interrogating you?" He emphasized the word "I," but his raised voice caused Wright to glance at him with dissatisfaction. Maybe I shouldn't let non-professionals in. The corner of Zhang Luan's eyes twitched again. After Wright finished speaking, he only showed him the back of his head. Zhang Lu, and threw away the cigarette butt, adjusted his breathing and walked over to open the door. During the process he subconsciously tilted his head. Because his body had shifted, there was no longer lead to block him. He saw his wife wriggling on the bed, and the extent of her muscles twitching was far greater than this, so much so that the open wounds left by the torture earlier burst open one after another, once again oozing blood. Zhang Lu, and hurriedly turned his head again, and heard Wright continue to speak to Yen Fun. It sounded gentle, but it was chilling. "Very good, this level is just right. My professional tells me that the activity in your cerebral cortex is very intense, and they are emitting tens of times more information than normal. I believe that the secret door in your heart is now open to me." His footsteps quickened, and Zhang Lu, and finally touched the doorknob. He pulled the door open with a lot of strength, but it only opened a big gap. At the same time he used his strong body to block the gap. He stared at XNZ and said in a strict tone, "What's going on?" XNZ's expression was also quite serious. "Brother, and I just looked at the electricity meter monitor. The blackout area is obviously still running electricity. Should we take another look? Are you sure it's in Wu Jun's shop? How's the electricity consumption?" "It's not that big," Zhang Lu, and was indeed listening to XNZ, but his current brain circuit was obviously not suitable for in-depth analysis. Wright's slow voice in the room was like a knife repeatedly grinding on his ear mold. "I don't mind telling you another little piece of information. In your current state, the taste of brain juice is not good. There's too much seasoning in it, so I'll give you a chance to digest it. What you need to do is to strive for a small chance of survival during this period of time. You should do your best to obey me, please me, and tell me everything you know. Of course, you should also trust me and believe that this little fellow is a very sensitive control center, and can almost perfectly repeat all of my commands." "Why did you say almost?" "This was because the orders given to it would occasionally conflict with its instincts. So try not to beg for mercy when you reach the edge of the cliff. Who knows what accident might happen then." At this moment, Zhang Lu, and was already doing his best to keep his expression from collapsing. He could no longer look into XNZ's eyes. He just wanted to find a reason to get rid of him. "You guys go ahead and scout. We'll talk when you get back." Yen Fun, who was lying on the bed, let out a sharp scream as soon as the **T reason came out of his mouth. Zhang Lu, and's hand shook, and he almost pulled the door handle off. He slammed the door back and it almost hit the tip of XNZ's nose. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stop the sound from reaching the hall outside. There was no doubt that Zhang Lu, and's old face had been completely thrown into the mud. When he turned around, Zhang Lu, and's head was even a little dizzy. Wright was still there, muttering, "Madame Yen Fun, you should maintain your strength. This is a very long process. I've seen too many people waste all their physical strength and energy before they have a mental breakdown, resulting in complete loss of control of their body functions. Not to mention the fact that it's not good for your life and health. The hygiene problems that come with it can also be a headache. The treasure bug can induce but not directly control the target's nerve center. This is more or less a flaw. Right, you pervert? You keep nagging, can't you say something meaningful?" Zhang Lu and was roaring in his heart when a different voice poured into his ear. "Then why not use the Vulcan ant? Not only can it achieve basic desire induction through pheromones, but it can also directly mobilize the neural network to achieve precise control. I think it's much more reliable than this treasure bug that you've been bragging about." "Well said." This was Zhang Lu and's first reaction, but in the next moment his mind suddenly went blank. It was also at this time that the door that had just been closed directly bounced open. The heavy solid wood door fiercely slammed into his face, causing him to see stars. His nose and mouth were full of a hot and fishy smell. Zhang Lu, and let out a short cry of alarm, his body staggering backwards. The room door bounced back from his face, but it was quickly pushed open again. Accompanying it was XNZ's long and thin body. His number one subordinate had his back to the door and collapsed, his eyes rolling back and forth. He was already unconscious. The person who had orchestrated all of this stood at the door in a heavy cloak. He knocked twice on the solid wood door that had been tossed and turned back to show his politeness. Under the double concealment of the hood and mask, the person's eyes were still bright and sharp. He directly passed through the battered and exhausted Xuanhuan and looked at the bed, then back and forth between Wright and Yanfun. "This really is a professional question." On the side of the bed, Wright muttered softly as if he was praising and sighing to himself. He spoke slowly, but his movements were as fast as lightning. When the door smashed into Xuanhuan's face, he immediately grabbed Yanfun's throat, realizing the best use of resources. Then he turned half his body and looked directly at the cloaked man by the door. He formally greeted him. "Aren't you going to introduce yourself?" His series of actions and reactions were perfect and calm. The only flaw was that it happened to coincide with Xuanhuan's roar, which was filled with blood and mucus. "Furnace, how did you get in?" Luonan, who was under the cloak, turned his body to let Xianglu and see his subordinates lying in disorder in the hall. "Is there any use in saying all this nonsense?" "Oh, I can explain the specific reason. I'm interested in Polio's mother's shop. Oh, you should call her Boss June. I'm interested in the off-road vehicle in her shop and want to swipe my card to buy it. However, I heard from Polio that the swipe terminal in the shop is temporarily managed by Aunt Fun, who is your wife. I'm in a hurry, so I came directly. I came in a hurry without any prior notice. I'm really sorry. It's just like the blackout in your market. It's easy for people to learn bad things." Was it because of the blackout? A ridiculous idea flashed through Xuanhuan's mind. In fact, the most logical action for him now was to make a move. However, when he saw his subordinates lying on the ground in the hall and thought about the few seconds of criminal time between him closing the door and being slammed in the face by the door, his courage to make a move unknowingly disappeared like a bubble. Then he saw the cloaked man opposite him sway. He was here. Xuanhuan was nearly 1.9 meters tall and was at least a head taller than the cloaked man. However, he didn't have the courage to stand in front of the cloaked man. He could only retreat awkwardly. However, he didn't control his direction well and knocked into the chest of drawers that he was leaning against. His back also knocked into a protruding corner of the electronic photo frame, causing it to fall to the ground. Why would Xuanhuan care about such details? He hurriedly adjusted his balance and turned around with small steps. He passed through the passageway between the chest of drawers and the couch and arrived at the other side of the couch. Now he had the double cover of the couch in right. As for what he had stepped on and broken, it was completely out of his range of attention. But after he finished a series of actions, he discovered that he wasn't in the other's range of attention at all. The fluttering cloak was merely an effect of the furnace, taking out the card terminal. This person had really brought the terminal from Wu Jun's shop. He held it in his hand and shook it a few times. "However, I hope that there are more solid steps." Wright was somewhat disappointed. No matter how beautiful the proposal was, it could only be described as bragging if there was no substantive entry point. In that case, there was nothing to talk about. His eyes slanted to the other side. It was said that a certain person looked tall and strong, but when he walked, he couldn't even be compared to an old lady with bound feet. Was it going to take until tomorrow to finish? Being penetrated by Wright's ice-cold gaze a second time, Xuanhuan truly felt as if there was a blade on his back. His feet instinctively sped up and then he arrived. Xuanhuan's nostrils started to ache again when he reached the very close standard again. In fact, half of his face was still smeared with blood. He didn't even need to look in the mirror to know that he must be in a very sorry state. He didn't have any idea what was going on. He floated around, his voice trembling slightly. "Furnace Elder?" Sir. Can I operate the card terminal?" "Of course." Luonan extended his hand and handed the terminal over. He waited for Xuanhuan to take it, then he suddenly laughed. "Polio is so straightforward. You're his temporary guardian, so you shouldn't fall behind. How about you give me a discount as well?" Okay. Actually, the transaction points I obtained from my credit rating are only 328 points. It's quite painful to have them deducted all at once. It wouldn't be a problem if it was just a fraction. How about 28? I'll continue with the discount." Xuanhuan revealed an awkward and helpless smile. He was completely confused by Luonan's words. Next, he could only stare blankly at Luonan as he took out the metal card representing the transaction voucher and lightly pasted it onto the card terminal. "So it's like this." "That's right." "Wait a moment." Xuanhuan finally remembered the basic operation, but at this stage he only had this bit of instinct left. He completely followed Luonan's instructions and entered the insincere number 28. A beep rang out and the card terminal was successfully swiped. Zhang Lu and subconsciously glanced at the display screen. The basic information related to the furnace was displayed on it. It was also the basic proof for completing transactions and employment in the various vagrant exchanges such as the Yuhol market, fleshly side, mechanical design and assembly. Zhang Lu, and didn't know why he blurted out these words. Behind him, Wright let out a laugh. What a dog's hit system. I heard that it was invented by the leader of your Xialuo order. Oh my, he's also a dog's hit character. Wright's reaction was quite big and Zhang Lu An's face twitched. He suddenly understood why Wright insisted on letting him swipe the card. Wright was clearly collecting information on the furnace to make a judgment. The problem was that from Wright's perspective, the answer he obtained was just like the money being swiped in. There was no sincerity to speak of. There's no fleshly side that can knock down 10 people in an instant, and at the same time, be able to completely block out the changes in the surrounding atmosphere. So, dogs hit fleshly side. This Mr. Furnace is only a mental side. Nonsense, I can guess it too. Zhang Lu and silently cursed, and Luonan's line of sight followed Wright's explanation at this time. He turned to look at Zhang Lu's side. Zhang Lu and instinctively revealed the hearty smile he normally wore when socializing. But his current state of mind could only seriously deform his facial expression. Even he himself felt embarrassed. Zhang Lu Un. Wright's deep and low voice suddenly came from behind him. Zhang Lu and subconsciously quivered. He wanted to turn his head, but his mind suddenly went blank. Wright's words from just now reappeared in his mind. Bullshit fleshly side. It can only be the mental side. Hold on, the mental side. This fellow is a mental side. Then his close combat ability should be quite weak. Also, I'm a genuine fleshly side and my combat ability is top-notch. Now that the distance is within reach, isn't this a great opportunity? And at this time, he saw the gaze of the furnace shift in Wright's direction. Just as it was about to turn, this was the best opportunity. A sure hit strike. The high-speed flow of thoughts instantly pieced together into a seemingly reliable chain. It was like some sort of transmission device that spurred Zhang Luan's body, including the courage and gamble that were suppressed in the deepest depths of his heart. Zhang Luan's mind heated up. He stamped his feet, lifted his hips, twisted his waist and threw a punch. He borrowed the good position of standing sideways next to the furnace to unleash a left swing fist, biting towards his target's waist and kidneys like a poisonous dragon. With the current distance between the two, Zhang Lu's fist had just exerted force when the tip of his fist had already reached the edge of the cloak. Then the fist drilled inexorably inside. Hit. Zhang Lu, and could already feel the side muscles of his opponent's waist from the feedback of his fist. He seized the opportunity to twist his fist. He wanted to use all of his strength to smash his opponent's internal organs into mush. But in that moment, his twisting fist only tossed and turned in the empty air behind the cloak. At the same time, a figure flashed before his eyes. Just by relying on the instincts of a fighter, Luonan was able to determine that his opponent's feet should be a cross step. Luonan went against the direction of his fist and made a graceful dodge. An expert. This thought jumped out in Zhang Luan's mind, but he was unable to correct his instinctive driving force. He could only follow the predetermined path of judgment. I can't let the distance between me and the spirit. This thought was so strong that Zhang Luan's mind exploded with a bang. He completely lost his follow-up plan. Instead, with an absolutely unorthodox movement, his body lunged forward. His other arm also stretched out and forcefully wrapped around the furnace's waist and abdomen. Even if he couldn't hug it, he had to grab the furnace's cloak. He had to restrict this person's movements. As for what to do after that, it was completely out of Zhang Luan's consideration. Perhaps Zhang Luan's unorthodox movement had some unexpected results. In the next instant he really did manage to grab the middle of the cloak. Both of their figures froze. Next. What should I do next? Zhang Luan was suddenly stunned. He completely didn't understand how the situation had turned out this way. It was also at this moment that Wright, who had been speaking in a low and drawn-out tone, suddenly let out a sharp whistle. At the side of the room, a layer of blurry stone powder and water mist suddenly splashed out from the stone wall structure that was originally part of the natural karst cave, blurring people's vision. A ferocious flat head the size of half a human passed through the side of the stone wall. Wrapped in a misty water mist, it opened its bloody mouth that was similar to a crocodile's, biting towards the direction where Lei Lin and the furnace were entangled. giant salamander, the pet of the brain demon. Zhang Lu, and still remembered that it was this monster that had seriously injured and subdued the skilled Yanfen in the blink of an eye when he had jumped back. His strength was extremely strong. And now this cooperation was also seamless. Wait, I'm also in the attack range. Zhang Lu, and suddenly sobered up. His mind was even more agile than usual. In an instant he understood the role he had played in this series of actions. Even the reason why he was so fearless was also clear and obvious. He screamed, "Right you!" What followed was an even sharper hissing sound. Zhang Lu, and felt his body float up, and then he was thrown out by a terrifying force. And the place where the force was applied was its extended right arm. Chapter 7:18. Zhang Lu, and screamed loudly. His blood flow had sped up due to him gathering his energy and exerting his strength. A large open wound suddenly appeared, and his situation turned for the worse. Blood sprayed out from the ruptured part of his flesh and blood. The enormous pain and fear that followed directly smashed his mental defenses. His entire face contorted to the limit, and he even began to tear up. Oh, what terrible execution! As Wright lamented, the giant salamander that had mistakenly struck him wasn't greedy. Its thick and fat body came over horizontally, occupying nearly half the space between the bed and the door. It also blocked between Wright and Luonan, becoming a solid barrier. Luonan avoided the fatal attack in the nick of time and shook his head under his cloak. Then he looked at the rock wall that the giant salamander had drilled out from. The wall had undergone some renovations so it could be considered smooth and flat. There weren't any holes that could allow a monster of that size to pass through. There were only a few traces of wetness. It was similar to the wall passing technique. It was a bidirectional distortion of the giant and the semi-void. No, there should be another ability. It looks like you really are a fleshly body. The level of your ability is quite surprising. Wright was still speaking in a slow and unhurried manner like a boss, but the strength he used to grip Yanfen's throat had clearly increased. Luonan sighed. You've said so much nonsense. This giant salamander of yours is about to breathe its last. I learned in biology class that the tetrodotoxin contained in the salamander is insoluble in water. If you want to spray a poisonous mist, you probably have to use its acidic bodily fluids to neutralize it. It's hard enough to do this over and over again. Biology class? One is never too old to learn. Wright's gaze roamed over Luonan's cloak. He didn't linger on this topic, but who knew what he was thinking? 2 seconds later, Wright returned to communication mode. It was as if hypnotizing Zhang Lu and to mount a sneak attack and pouring neurotoxin into the room had never happened. This giant salamander doesn't satisfy me. This is why I don't like the karst caves of Spring City. There are far too few mutants here that are suitable to be controlled. At the beginning of the aberration era, this karst cave was one of the first areas to fall into enemy hands. However, because it attracted the most attention, it was cleaned out early on and became the isolation zone between Spring City and the wilderness. Then it was filled with people like Zhang Lu, and had already fainted due to massive bleeding, pain and fear, so he couldn't hear this evaluation. Wright only said it casually, and the focus of the topic quickly jumped to Zhang Lu, Anne's wife. Maybe tetrodotoxin is useless to you, but I really want to know, can you stop this lady from absorbing the same toxin? In the previous experiments, my control of the dosage was relatively accurate, but seeing you here, it's too difficult for me to control the dosage in milligrams. Of course, it's not easy to control the power in your hands. On the bed, Yanfen's face had already turned purple, and she began to convulse due to a severe lack of oxygen. The neurotoxin had already weakened her ability to breathe, and now that lighter was clutching her throat, all of her breathing channels had been cut off. She was about to reach her limit. Luonan obviously knew that this was a threat, but he didn't immediately respond. It seemed that he was weighing the pros and cons. Wright maintained his smile. Why don't we get to the bottom of things? Just who are you? What's your relationship with the Xiaoluo cult? I haven't seen you in the data, and you don't seem to fit in with this sort of low-level cult that holds a tattered cloak like a treasure. Are you Wu Jun's friend? Lover? Mercenary? Yes. I see injustice on the road and I draw my blade to help. Is that okay? That's a really annoying answer. Okay, I also feel that there's too much nonsense between us. But right now I hold the initiative. You should answer. What are you going to do? Your mission has failed and you're still asking me what to do? Luonan leaned against the wall to the side of the door and chatted with Wright. He casually said a few words of mockery. You can't get hold of Boss Jun's weakness, and the rebels who cooperated with you have all been annihilated. Aside from grabbing a woman's throat and showing off, What other use do you have? If I were your boss, I would certainly deduct your entire year's salary in funds. Then I'd say, don't let me see you again. That would vent my anger. This was an imitation of Zhang Yingying's tone of voice. Though it was usually quite noisy, the effect here was quite decent. The smile on Wright's face remained unchanged, but his eyes grew colder and colder. He was angry. Of course, the more convincing reason was that his preparations in the Abyss region were more or less complete. Hypnotizing Zhang Lu and releasing poison, forcing an awkward conversation. Perhaps Wright really wasn't a combat-type ability user, but his brain was still quite good. He had completed a complex set of multiple layers of cover in this tense atmosphere. He had used this trump card that might have been excessively heavy. Unfortunately, it was still too slow. Luonan snapped his fingers. This sort of cliché to the point of explosion still fit his aesthetic standards. However, he had forgotten that he was wearing a disguise glove on his hand. His posturing had failed, so he could only let out a muffled fart on his fingertips. He was extremely embarrassed for a time. Fortunately, he hadn't used the snap of his fingers as a signal. Moreover, he had successfully attracted Wright's attention. Even if it was only for an instant, it was enough to distract Wright. It was at this moment that the long flat tail of the giant salamander, which had been disliked, suddenly swung rapidly from a position close to the ground. It was like a steel blade scraping across the ground. Wright lost his balance amidst the strange sound of flesh and bone being torn apart. His brain hadn't reacted in time. He had partially overlooked this change, so much so that he still had a smile on his face. Then his entire smiling face became crooked due to the tilt of his body. His instinctive reaction surpassed the speed of his thinking in the next moment. Wright's right hand instinctively exerted force, wanting to snap Yanfen's throat. However, he didn't feel anything at all. He transmitted his thoughts over, but his entire right arm didn't receive the feedback it should have. Wright's eyes weren't enough. His eyes had just dropped to his feet when they slanted to his right arm. Therefore, from the corner of his eye, he glanced at the foot that had been completely dislocated and the ankle that was only left with bone stubble and rotten flesh. The focus of his eyes was an even more bizarre scene. His right arm had been separated from his body from the elbow. There wasn't any blood splashing out, only the instantly decaying flesh and skin structure. It was like mycelium spores that scattered and fluttered in the air. Ah! Amidst his hoarse roar, the right arm that had been separated from his body actually made a slight reaction. It was more like the final spasm of his broken nerves and muscles due to the residual force. It flipped Yanfen's body from a flat position to a sideways position, almost pulling him off the bed. He had enough strength, but he had used it in the wrong direction. Due to the change in his posture, Yanfen's effective field of vision rapidly expanded. He finally saw the intense and bloody scene on the other side of the bed. Very quickly, another ruthless stroke was added to the scene. Wright had lost a leg, and the force exerted on his upper body was also dislocated. Naturally, he lost his balance and fell to the side. He bounced off the edge of the bed and fell to the ground. The giant salamander, which was very close to him, subconsciously swung its tail again. This time, the long blade-like tail practically cut through the middle of Wright's chest and abdomen. As it cut through his flesh, fat, fascia, and even organs, it also turned his roar into a muffled moan. In the end, Lake didn't say the latter half of his words. He just used his remaining blood-splattered left hand to forcefully slap the base of the giant salamander's tail. This should be a forceful signal. In the end, a considerable portion of the giant salamander was still under his control. The body of this thick and sturdy monster, which didn't have any vocal organs, trembled, rubbing against the ground as it charged forward. However, a major problem appeared in its coordination. Its originally vigorous pounce became completely inaccurate. It swayed left and right like a car that had lost control. With a crash, it scraped against the door frame and half the wall as it charged into the living room. Then came the noise of an enormous struggle. The safety of the people lying on the ground in disorder outside was worrying. Wright lay on the ground, looking at this scene in astonishment. Soon, his gaze returned to the shadow of Luonan's hood. 2 seconds later, he spoke with a hoarse voice. "How did you do it?" "It's as I said before. Fire god ant," Luonan indicated for Wright to shift his gaze to look at the ant-type mutant that was crawling on the ground amidst the bloodstains. These were 2 large ants the size of a thumb. They had just fallen off the giant salamander's body and were crawling towards the group of their own kind. And the number of fire god ants on the giant salamander's body was over 10 times greater. "Fresh delivery. I just got them." Luonan swept a glance at Ruewen, who was in the shadows in the corner. He revealed a smile that Wright couldn't see. "You control and induce this salamander's instincts and basic thoughts. The fire god ant controls its central nervous system. You make the salamander view me as an enemy, and I use it to perform a set of simple actions. Back and forth. It's very fair." Wright stared blankly at the fire god ant crawling in his bloodstains. "Where's the ant queen?" "You're talking about controlling the ant queen. No matter what, the ant queen is on the mental side. She's also the axis of collective consciousness. It doesn't matter where she is. You just need to control the signal from a remote relay." Controlling the ant queen? Wright discovered that he didn't understand Luonan's explanation, but he could feel that it was a matter of course. Controlling a nest of fire god ants. Then I'll observe and experiment. I'll do a few more rounds. That's all. Luonan really was a matter of course. On the plane of reality, controlling a nest of mutants and controlling the corresponding population was still a shocking bomb that could blow up the academic world, the inner world, and even the wider domain. Not to mention anything else, just relying on this topic alone was enough to support a large laboratory and publish hundreds of high-quality theses. Then he could rely on citations and honor points to eat for a lifetime. With this kind of experimental foundation, it wasn't strange for him to do anything. Wright's lips and teeth opened and closed. He was barely able to turn his weak breath into speech. There was also a hoarse and strange laughter. Yes. You're more professional than me. But you won't be in every domain." His voice had completely broken at the end, but the energy of Wright's entire body was chaotic and restless. It was as if a fire had been ignited in the depths of his bones and muscles. Oh, the abyssal region's configuration was still there. Chapter 719. Wright's own aura was practically overturned, yet the abyssal region's configuration remained unchanged. Clearly it wasn't based on Wright's will. It was borrowing some sort of external force. But in order to borrow power, one's body needed to have a basic levering power. Wright, who had entered a dying state, had chosen to burn himself. Under the state of flames, the macromolecules that formed the human body would become especially excited. They would decompose into atoms and then rapidly undergo all sorts of chemical reactions. They would be pieced together into carbon dioxide, water vapor, or something else. At the same time, substances with higher melting points and boiling points would be left behind. Of course, Wright wasn't truly burning right now. Or perhaps it could be said that what was burning was not his body but his soul. Even the virtual brain system had never made a clear definition of the essence of the soul. But from the perspective of a cultivator, their core, which needed to be stable and firm, suddenly underwent a phase change. What it displayed seemed to be no different from the laws of the material world. The soul burned and released heat. Moreover, it reacted with the other components of the surrounding environment to recombine into a new structure. Once a reaction occurred, the result of the reconstruction would be irreversible. Luonan watched as Wright's burning soul fused with certain components of the abyssal region storm. Wright's burning soul fused with a completely different form to fill the precise configuration. The precision of this configuration far exceeded the limits of what a B-mental side could control. But after paying the price of burning his soul, the results were immediate. The power of the torrential storm that was stirred up instantly increased by over 5 times. And as the boundary of the burning continued to penetrate inward, Wright lost even more of the essence of his soul. But the power he could control grew stronger and stronger. This sort of burning certainly followed a special rule framework. Only then could the released energy operate in a more effective manner. It didn't scatter and dissipate without any meaning. It was a bit like an altar. Luonan subconsciously compared his own altar framework with it. The more he looked, the more similarities there were. This was indeed a configuration system similar to a sacrificial order. It was just that it was more cruel and violent. And judging from Luonan's theory of being a tool type and a plant type, it clearly belonged to the latter. Luonan quietly leaned against the wall. His gaze penetrated the barrier of the material world to observe the complex state of the abyssal region. The system of this order is huge. It has a developed root system that covers a wide area through the abyssal region. However, it obviously has a more complicated hierarchy and even authority settings. Wright shouldn't belong to the upper echelons of the system because the power he borrows only comes from the tip of the root system. Or perhaps it's just the humus soil that's affected by the roots and fallen leaves. Hey, no matter what, Wright was still a B-rank psychic. Regardless of which organization he was in, he should be in the middle or upper echelons. If even he was only in the periphery, then wouldn't the core strength of this order be at the top? Luonan's eyes blinked a few times. It was at this moment that Wright raised his blood-stained left hand. the color of the blood and the wound on the skin of his palm that had just been torn apart rapidly formed a distorted and deformed figure. The power of qi and blood and the storm of the abyss area converged at the center of the palm. The air pressure in the room was clearly rising rapidly. Due to the uneven distribution between the areas, an invisible whirlpool was formed. Since it was already like this in the real world, the storm in the abyss zone became even more agitated. The mental side, or at least the mental side below the level of an extraordinary, would find it several times more difficult to temporarily construct a structure in such an environment. In other words, Luonan had lost the initiative on the level of combat. Wright's lips parted to reveal a warped smile. The pain of having his stomach split open made him lose interest in talking. He was already impatient to reap the pleasure of an extreme counterattack. Luonan furrowed his brows. He noticed that there was another indescribable eye behind Wright's bloodshot and turbid eyes. It was slowly opening amidst the torrential storm of the abyss zone. There was a bit of error in his previous judgment. The order system that Wright belonged to still possessed a flexible method of setting up the level of authority. Perhaps Wright was only able to use the humus soil in the beginning, but as the level of the sacrifice increased, so much so that the influence of the event itself could still touch the main body of the root system, to continue increasing its power. At this very moment, that bewitching eye was releasing light and absorbing light. It stirred the abyss zone and reorganized information within the chaotic storm in order to understand the various changes in the state of affairs of this side of the world. This was also a process of awakening of authority. The greater the matter, the greater the effort. Luonan sighed in response to this. Tonight has already been full of accidents. Now that a big guy has jumped in, it's really hard to clean things up. It's best if we don't meet for now. What the hell are you talking about? Wright's words were squeezed out from between his teeth. Luonan's incomprehensible words and the casual attitude he displayed were far more painful than the lacerations on his hands and feet and the wounds on his chest and abdomen. His current sorry appearance made it impossible for him to assume a calm posture. He could only use even more violent methods to wash away the humiliation of his crushing defeat and heavy injuries. His lips opened and closed as he chanted the incantation of sacrifice. The secret sound resonated with the mental and material planes to hypnotize his own body. He did his best to match the gradually awakening level of power in the abyss zone. Then he used his broken fleshly body as a guide, disregarding the consequences, to form the most lethal attack. Wright's voice rose, "The eye of all souls that pierces through the heavens." There was a sudden click in the air. It was as if an invisible finger had turned off an invisible air switch. At the same time, the abyss zone's sacrificial configuration was like a slanted fort piled up by children on a beach. It didn't even have to endure the frontal impact of the waves. It collapsed with a rumble because of a small vibration. The abyss zone's slowly opened eye of all souls was like a sand painting. It warped beyond recognition in the blink of an eye. Wright's eyes widened, but soon the fragile water crystals exploded from the recoil force. The powerful force that the abyss zone had just gathered then collapsed, mercilessly devoured him. The humus of the order was originally on the periphery, so it didn't matter if it received the attack. However, Wright, who was close at hand, seemed to have a bomb placed in his skull and his internal organs. Blood sprayed out from his 7 orifices at the same time, especially his eyeballs. His already cracked chest and abdomen sprayed out a mist of blood and pieces of internal organs. They were spun by the vortex of air, covering most of the room. As for Wright himself, he was a bloody mess. It was hard to call him human. It was also at this moment that Yen Fun, who was on the bed, obtained strength from who knows where. She used her hoarse voice to let out a shout filled with delight. Luonan shot a glance in that direction. Actually, he himself was within the range of the blood that sprayed out. However, he couldn't care about these details at this time. He slowly walked forward amidst the chaotic vortex of air that had lost its order. He walked to Wright's side, who was already breathing more than he was breathing. Though Wright's sacrificial configuration was destroyed, Luonan wasn't happy to see the chaotic storm that surged and devoured him on the level of the abyss zone. People needed to finish what they started. Luonan didn't forget that the surroundings of Spring City were filled with the hounds of Quantum Corporation. This group of people were all nervous. If by any chance the other side really did follow the trail, then it would become a seesaw. They would push down one end and raise the other end. They clearly wanted to help, but they would give the other side even more trouble. I need to clear the channel? Luonan needed to promptly release the flood before the turbulent storm of the abyss zone broke through the threshold of alertness. It would be best if he could erase all traces. Of course, this was much more difficult than destruction. It was like kicking away several thousand building blocks that had already been constructed into a castle. Then, the building blocks would follow the order they were arranged in before they were sealed, falling neatly back into the box. Let right return to right and let evil eye return to evil eye. Everything would be like it had never happened. For months ago, Luonan could forget about doing this even if he squeezed out all of his brain juice. Luckily, Luonan had been facing the cloud labyrinth for the past few months, which was far more complicated than the situation before his eyes. In that harsh environment, it was like building blocks or a jigsaw puzzle. He tried to reassemble the billions of pieces of the structure and form a complete logic. This was the repeated strengthening of the basic concept of configuration construction. Luonan categorized the configuration fragments into different categories. He used the theory of the virtual brain system as a benchmark to sort them out one by one. From the most basic number, size, weight, and height, it gradually rose to the balance and symmetry between the various parts. It even reached the structural relationship between the parts and the whole. Aside from theory, there was also practice. Just the priority of interference control was like calligraphy. The use of the brush, the structure, the technique of composition, and the technique of ink were all carefully divided. They could be divided into several dozen major and minor items. All of them needed to be diligently practiced and corrected from time to time. Luonan's accumulation of soul strength was vigorous and peerless. Otherwise, with the intensity of his practice, just the enormous consumption and the backlash from the shattering of the configuration would be enough to kill a normal ability user 1,000 times over. With such a rich reserve of experience, Luonan looked at Wright's crude method of construction once more. He really had a wonderful sense of superiority, like a reborn elementary school student. Not to mention the fact that he had just witnessed the entire process of the sacrificial configuration from nothing to something. It was built step by step. It was tantamount to having a standard answer first. All that was left was to test his memory. Even if he didn't, he would be able to see the shattered configuration fragments. He would be able to complete the dismantling and restoration work according to the laws and principles of the virtual brain system. He could also explore the rationality of the details in passing. Chapter 720. Luonan could more or less understand the reason for Yanfan's shocked and pale expression. After all, this sort of phenomenon, similar to the reversal of time and space, was quite frightening from a visual perspective. But it was a pity that this was only an illusion. This relatively complete body was merely a temporary carrier to collect Wright's chaotic collapse of energy. The complex and precise functions of the human body were ultimately not building blocks. It was impossible for Luonan to bestow a new life force to the already shattered cellular tissues. This already exceeded the limits of the domain that his soul strength could reach. At most, he could only give Yanfan and even Wright the illusion that he was mostly mistaken. And it was precisely this tiny domain constructed from this illusion that still allowed the flow of consciousness and cognition. It even allowed the body to make the tiniest of minute reactions. Within this tiniest of minute limits, Wright's remnant consciousness and his incomplete body blended together. It was like a spark beneath a whirlwind of ashes. Though it was tiny, it was still bright. Wright miraculously retained a single breath. This also allowed him to personally experience the marvelous taste of his body disintegrating and reassembling, of his soul burning and reassembling. This was truly the life and death of a person. It followed a majestic and powerful will. It suddenly died and suddenly existed, treading back and forth on the boundary between life and death. And all of this was led by the furnace before his eyes. No, it was the master. He did his best to widen his eyes. The dim light of the outside world penetrated through the shattered and reassembled crystal. It spurred on the cone cells and a series of subsequent nerve reflexes, combining the fuzzy information of the outside world with the imaginary illusions in his brain. It made this demon, who was already destined to die, let out the most pious sigh of his entire life. Oh God! The temporarily reassembled soul was annihilated. The reformed body collapsed and dissolved like a pile of mud. It also completely digested the impact force of the abyssal storm, turning the intense turbulence of the abyssal plane into nothingness. This was undoubtedly an extremely cruel way to die. But before Wright completely disintegrated, his vocal cords vibrated. A weak force pushed through the layers of conduction in the air molecules, transmitting the sigh that was rich with emotions and time. Though the range of influence didn't even exceed a diameter of 3 meters, it was already enough for Luonan and Yanfan to hear it. Was this a god? A certain someone's requirements were really low. Luonan shook his head slightly. He wasn't as ignorant as Wright. The virtual brain system involved configuration, dynamo core, and all sorts of other deep theories. Luonan still didn't fully understand them. He stumbled and stumbled when putting them into practice. He could only advance at a tortoise speed within the labyrinth of clouds and mist, and from his perspective of experience, it was just a brilliant sun wheel within an abyss. The might that came from the endless void was immeasurable. With such a comparison, if he were a god, the power system of this universe would probably collapse immediately. In the end, it was just an overly delusional delusion of an ignorant person. This was what Luonan thought, but Yanfen, who was lying on the bed, quivered and her entire face swelled red. At that moment she was still under the influence of the nerve agent. Her limbs were numb and it was difficult for her to control them. She could only barely move her vocal cords to spell out 2 words between hiccups and chuckles. Luckily Luonan's ears were good. After Yanfen repeated it several times, he was finally able to make out the words clearly. Cloak, cloak. Hey, a cloak is different from a cloak. Of course, Luonan knew that what Yanfen said wasn't the literal meaning, but now wasn't the time to get to the bottom of it. From his perspective, finding the right nerve agent treatment method and antidote was more difficult than anything he had done before. His gaze turned to the door of the damaged room. There, the Vulcan ant was controlling the giant salamander to stagger back. Treat a dead horse as if it were alive. I know the one who started the trouble needs to untie it. Whether or not tonight's matter would have a good ending would depend on whether or not this old saying filled with empiricism would be useful. Reality proved that Luonan's luck wasn't bad. It was just as Dead Ghost Right had said. He didn't add too much nerve agent to Yanfen. Yanfen herself had a rather powerful fleshly body. Her bodily functions were much stronger than a normal person's. After stopping the continuous injection of the nerve agent, Luonan assisted her in combing her neural network, and she slowly recovered. When she was barely able to move, Yanfen struggled to get down to the ground. She practically threw herself at Luonan's feet. She didn't care about the filth and bloodstains on the ground. She gave a heavy kowtow. There weren't any words of thanks coming out of her mouth. Instead, she piously kissed the corner of Luonan's cloak. Was this a custom of some vagrant tribe or their Xialuo cult? When in Rome, do as the Romans do. Perhaps it could be said that Luonan maintained the principle of acting cool. Luonan resisted his instinct to avoid it and accepted it. Yanfen gave another kowtow after completing the ceremony. Then she staggered to her feet. She practically used her hands and feet to arrive at a corner of the room. Xuanhuan, who had fallen into a semi-conscious state due to massive blood loss, lay there. Yanfen didn't say a word from beginning to end. She just used her trembling hands to feel around Xuanhuan's body. Soon she pulled out a dagger from the leather sheath at Xuanhuan's waist. This should be the weapon that Xuanhuan normally used. He didn't have the time to use it when he attacked Luonan, but now Yanfen had it in her hands. Without any hesitation, Yanfen stabbed the dagger straight into Xuanhuan's perfectly fine left shoulder socket. Luonan's eyebrows jumped when he saw this, but he didn't seem to have the qualifications to say anything since his feet were a bloody mess. Xuanhuan woke up from the pain and screamed loudly. But when his eyes reflected the pale and distorted face of his wife, it was as if his throat had been cut open. Only the hissing sound of air leaking could be heard for a time. Yanfen pressed the weight of her entire body onto the dagger. The edge of the dagger had long since pierced through Xuanhuan's shoulder socket, stabbing into the ground below. She was very close to Xuanhuan and her husband. She was practically speaking right next to their ears. Tell me, why did you do this? Hiss. Let go. Let go. Xuanhuan finally remembered to speak, but he begged for mercy from the torment of the pain. His thick and sturdy body spasmed and twitched as he rubbed against the ground. Tell me why. Yanfen's voice was weak. It was as if she could lose her voice at any time. But the enormous tension of her emotions bombarded Xuanhuan's heart with the piercing edge of the dagger. Xuanhuan wriggled and struggled on the ground to no avail. He could only scream with all his might, "The Shilua order is about to be finished. I told you before. Right is a member of the Amaterasu order. The Amaterasu order? The strongest of the 3 great orders. There's no hope for us if we're targeted by them." No hope? The breath in Yanfen's throat trembled. It was hard to tell whether she was crying or laughing. There's no hope for us if we're targeted. You want to sell everyone? Weren't you the ones who insisted on putting on airs? Blood gushed out of Xuanhuan's shoulder like a fountain. Blood flowed endlessly from his severed arm as well. His willpower had almost completely collapsed. Tears and snot flowed from the dignified and imposing man's eyes. He was in so much pain that he couldn't even reply for a time. Yanfen didn't need to reply either. She was just venting her emotions. It's you? You used the survival of the tribe as an excuse to push Wu Jun to the top. She's not a member of the tribe. She's just a postgraduate student stranded in the wilderness. She's still pregnant. She was about to return to the city to give Polio a better environment. It's you? You forced her to the top. It's because of the cloak, right? Because she's the only operator in the base who has mastered this technique. Once again Yanfen twisted the dagger in her hand. Zhang Lu, and screamed even louder. His waist and legs twisted. He tried desperately to shake Yanfen off, but it was all in vain. In the end he just gave up and shouted. So what? She should have given me the cloak, long ago. Give it to you? Didn't she want to return to the city? After returning to Spring City she could have left if she wanted to, but she refused to let go of the position. Those stubborn idiots really treated her like a priest. Fine, even if she was a priest, what did she do? All she did was enchantment. 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 These childish tricks might have been useful in the wilderness, but they're in a big city now. There are so many powerful people in the government, the military, the association, and the church. Enchantment is useless. Give me power, power. Zhang Lu An's face was purple, and his veins were bulging. He screamed at the top of his lungs, since she's a priest, isn't it reasonable for her to give power to her believers? If she can't even do that, how can she start a religion? How can she call herself a god? Yanfen screamed back, we never did that. However, Zhang Lu An was purely venting at this time. He only roared in his own logic, that bullsh *T cloak is simply the nonsense of a crazy old man. Only those stubborn fools would worship it as if it were a god and promote it wantonly. Now the Amaterasu sect is here. They asked for it and they got it. Why should I die with them? Of course I have to sell it for a good price. Yanfen stared at the man beneath her. She stared at her husband and squeezed out the words through her teeth. You're shameless. Only a useless god is shameless. Zhang Lu An pushed his head back. He didn't even care about the wound on his shoulder as he scolded, useless, unqualified. Compared to a real church, you're just trash that can't do anything. It's trash like this that has delayed me for so many years. My talent and youth have been ruined by this trash, and I still have to struggle in the cave like a worm. To hell with the cloak, to hell with the loyalty. His voice suddenly changed tone, mixing with the sound of his throat, skin, fascia, and bones being cut open. Yanfen pulled out her knife and slit her husband's throat. The airflow and gurgling blood drained the last bit of Zhang Lu An's vitality and ambition. At the same time she used up the last bit of her strength. Chapter 721. From 6 to 7 o'clock a.m., the simulated sky lighting was adjusted to its brightness. With the support of electricity, the ventilation system sent a cool breeze that brushed against the child's face. The slight light and touch triggered Polio's biological clock. He blinked and woke up from his sleep. His face was wrinkled. The warm and hard metal arm had left a few marks on his face, and it was bumpy to the touch. His neck wasn't comfortable either. How did I sleep last night? The grogginess from waking up couldn't subside. Polio felt that his head was swaying left and right and he was going to fall down at any moment. Should I sleep for a while? Oh, it's better not to. I seem to have forgotten something and it's a terrible memory. He rubbed his eyes with his left hand and rummaged through his blurry memory. The room door knocked twice before it was pushed open. Polio, today's breakfast is egg porridge. Wash up quickly before it gets cold. Oh, I understand, Aunt Fen. Polio shook his head and propped himself up from the floor. His memory surfaced. His mother was away and Aunt Fen delivered breakfast every morning. It was mealtime and then, Aunt Fen. Polio jumped up and chased after her. Yanfen turned around and caught Polio, who was like a cannonball. After physical contact, the ridiculous distance between the dream and reality was bridged. Polio's heart was pounding, and he lifted his head nervously to size up Fun. In his eyes, Aunt Fen's face was still fine, but there was an obvious strangulation mark on her neck, and her complexion was also very pale. These details shattered the illusion of a peaceful daily life, and made everything in the surroundings quickly become real. Polio remembered the previous night, the submarine escape, the accident, and Mr. Furnace. He wept beside Furnace, the magical charging, and his confession. All sorts of scenes flashed past his mind and he linked them together. It was supposed to be a prelude to a battle. Polio was prepared to fight, but, Aunt Fen, did you see Mr. Furnace? Yanfen smiled and gave Polio a peck on his cheek. Then she placed her cheek behind his head and said softly, "Of course I saw him. Thanks to your help, I didn't delay your breakfast." "Don't play it down." Polio grumbled loudly. He could smell the scent of blood and medicine on Aunt Fan's body. Her injuries weren't light. Xianxia smiled and looked at Polio as she said, "Aya, I'm sorry but that's the truth." Polio looked down on the behavior of treating him like a child, but he couldn't do anything to Aunt Fan. He could only compromise and ask, "Where's Mr. Furnace?" Mr. Smelter had something to do and left first. He also drove the off-road vehicle in the exhibition hall. Xianhui 28 points. Ah. Polio remembered that the off-road vehicle was a souvenir assembled by his mother. Though it was priced, it wasn't for export. Oh, Mr. Furnace mentioned it last night. But what does 28 points mean? I might as well just drive away. Polio felt that the logic of an adult was ridiculous. It diluted his focus on the series of unknown events last night. Xianxia used other factors to distract him. "Before leaving, Mr. Furnace gave you a gift and asked me to pass it to you. It's a pity that it's too big so I can't carry it up. You'll have to go down and take a look." Polio went downstairs in a daze and arrived at the exhibition hall. The powerful and domineering hand-assembled off-road vehicles were no longer there, but the shop didn't feel empty because there was a large number of hand-assembled off-road vehicles. Another gigantic fellow occupied the original spot. It was a thick reptile with 4 limbs and a long tail. Its head and neck were one and the same. Its grayish-black skin looked smooth and seemed to be wrapped in a layer of water film. There were yellowish-green round spots and protrusions on its skin. The color contrast was very strong. "AI, is this a salamander? It's so big." Polio recognized the commonly seen amphibian in the karst cave. Its body was too big. Its head and body were about 2 meters long, and its flat tail was about the same length as the rest of its body. It was a huge creature that was about 4 meters long. With Polio's small body, he wouldn't be visible even if he was swallowed. Xianxia confirmed, "It's a giant salamander. It's a mutant that lives in the karst cave waterway." "Is this the gift? Mr. Lava is a beast tamer?" Polio didn't dare to believe it. This large creature exceeded his expectations and understanding of gifts. He didn't care about what happened last night. He widened his eyes and sized up the giant salamander. He wanted to touch it, but Xianxia stopped him. "This creature has a bad temper. Your small arms and legs won't be able to touch it. Wear this." As she spoke, Xianxia placed a translucent leather ring and metal bracelet on the wrist of Polio's mechanical right arm. Though the combination of the leather band and metal was strange, the size of the bracelet was made according to the interface of the mechanical arm. It fitted perfectly and didn't affect the functions of the mechanical arm. Polio sized up the new accessory curiously and discovered a small creature crawling inside the translucent leather band. It was a fiery red ant, a real living creature. It was crawling in the hollow tunnel of the leather band. Polio didn't know how it was sealed in. It was interesting, but it was also confusing. "Put in your thoughts." That's what Mr. Furnace said. Xianxia's tone was rhythmic as though she was reciting a poem. "Though we have to work hard to operate the mechanical arm without electricity, we can start from the basics." With her voice and Polio's focused gaze, the ants crawling in the leather bracelet seemed to have received a signal, and their movements stopped. At the exhibition platform, the giant salamander, who was lying lazily on the ground, suddenly lifted its head and twisted its body. Its bulging eyeballs rotated as it looked in the direction of Polio and Polio. Polio and Polio stared at each other. Polio held his breath and exclaimed, "Wow!" using the chain configuration to link the individual brainwaves with the sensory organs of a single Vulcan ant. Then, through the condensation ring's global sensor network, it will connect with the Vulcan ant population. Simplified operating instructions and related interfaces have been added in the middle. It can partially realize intelligent operation, allowing idiots to operate. There are no problems with the basic idea, but it takes up a bit more resources and harasses the manipulator behind the scenes. After all, it's not like watching a child. I can optimize it further in the future. Luonan's brain operated at high speeds. He went over the design model of the present that Midnight had drafted in his mind once more to make sure that there were no obstructions. And from the feedback from the sensor network, Polio was having a lot of fun. Everyone was to their liking. Everything was perfect. Of course, this was just an embellishment after a series of tense events. It was a way of taking care of the cute little fellow. What Luonan truly needed to pay attention to was the entire plot thread he discovered last night. The Order of Justice and the Eye of Secret Contract were listed as one of the 3 great secret orders of the Amaterasu Order. Why would they be interested in the so-called holy relic of the pheasant order, something that even their own believers looked down upon? If this piece of information were to be sold, it would be enough for the various intelligence teams to give out month-end incentives. But what Luonan paid the most attention to in this entire thread was, "Luonan, are you seriously listening to Teacher Li's words?" Luonan shuddered. Only now did he come back to his senses. He noticed the people around him and the place they were in. Mrs. Luo Shuqing's gaze was stern. Her expression was furious as she sat on the sofa in the advisor's office. 2 meters away was the master of this office, Acumen College's dedicated advisor for the 10th grade, Mr. Li Mingde. Luonan himself stood across from the coffee table with the identity of a student who had committed a crime, receiving an education. However, his mind had been wandering outside the heavens just now. Old Immortal Mingde's words didn't even enter his ears. They were blocked out cleanly. "It's fine. It's fine." A young man's mind is quick-witted. His imagination is rich. A moment of distraction is nothing. And I understand student Luonan's personality. I'm worried that he's overthinking things. Li Mingde gently twirled the grizzled beard beneath his chin. This retro style suited his appearance quite well. It really did give him the air of a sage. If the cold sweat on his forehead was a bit less, then it would be even more perfect. Luo Shuqing bowed once more to express her apology. "Teacher Li, Luonan has really caused you trouble during this time." Li Mingde chuckled. He was just about to continue the previous topic when Luonan's gaze shot over. The back of his neck turned slightly cold and he shook his head vigorously on the spot. "No, no, no. This child, Luonan, is publicly acknowledged by our Academic Affairs Division. He's smart and precocious. He's quite different from ordinary children. This is a factor of his personality and IQ. It has nothing to do with how he conducts himself. You see, he doesn't have many friends in his age group. But he has a lot in common with his upperclassmen and the elites outside the school. That scoundrel Xie Junping has given him quite a few rotten ideas. Xuanhuan comes over every day to clean up his mess. The second generation of the Construction Society gnashes their teeth in anger at the mention of him. The Mystic Arts Research Society is directly surrounded by him. He brings bodyguards to the school and he openly flirts with society girls. All of you parents really don't know." Li Mingde's hand exerted strength and broke 2 strands of his beard. His lower jaw and heart twitched twice, but in the end, he maintained the demeanor of a teacher. "Mrs. Luo, we can't use ordinary eyes to look at special talents. Student Luonan has participated in many activities in this school year. He has also obtained outstanding results. Actually, this is something that the school and us teachers are happy to see." Luo Shuqing revealed a courteous and dignified smile to conceal her awkward and complex emotions. Perhaps Li Mingde saw through it, or perhaps he was completely indifferent. He just continued to speak according to the established plan. But in today's era of authority, one accepts the convenience of intelligence and also bears the restrictions of intelligence. In this way, some rules that are very suitable for ordinary people are used to treat geniuses. That's right, it's a student with extraordinary talent like Luonan. These rules often appear rigid and unreasonable. The school also hopes to find a plan that satisfies both sides. Student Luonan's special talent will be preserved to the greatest degree while finding a suitable and compliant space for him. Therefore we discussed for a bit. Perhaps Mrs. Luo, as his guardian, can be flexible and jump out of the boundaries of linear thinking. Luo Shuqing took a deep breath. "What do you mean?" Chapter 722. By the time the aunt and nephew left the office building, the golden-red rays of the late spring setting sun had already traversed more than half of the campus. The rays were cast from the angle between the North Shore jungle and the Long River, casting a thick film of light over the bright green wetland vegetation. Luonan slightly narrowed his eyes. His gaze pierced through the layer of sunlight that ordinary people would find hard to look directly at. He swept his gaze over the movement and changes within the campus. He wasn't observing. He just had nothing to do. Mrs. Luo Shuqing didn't say a single word for an entire 3 minutes after leaving Li Mingde's office. She just walked forward in the corridor, in the elevator, and in the vast campus. It was as if she had completely forgotten the existence of her nephew. Okay, she was really angry this time. Luonan reckoned that he was probably the only child of the Luo family in 3 generations to have been recommended by the school authorities to take a leave of absence from school. Taking a leave of absence from school was just a polite way of saying it. Retaining the school credits, hours, honor, and so on and so forth didn't change the essence of having to repeat a year. Without a doubt, This was the vile incident of being hung from a beam and ruthlessly whipped. Luonan really didn't know what to say. He had the help of Xie Junping and Hu Huaying, two super tinkers with connections that reached the heavens, but he still couldn't make up for the lowest standard of absenteeism at Acumen College. He had really been too arrogant these past few months. Perhaps he should start with the SCA and invade the Department of Education system. Luonan's mind spun with meaningless thoughts. At the same time, he had no choice but to admit that there was a little bit of relief and delight in the depths of his heart at the very least. If this matter were to really be smashed, then his life would really change. Mrs. Luo Shuqing suddenly stood still in front of him. Luonan reacted quickly and stood firm at the same time. His face hung low and his eyebrows lowered, making a terrified and ashamed appearance. Unfortunately, his acting skills were never up to par. Luo Shuqing's heart didn't fluctuate in the slightest. Her tone was flat as well. Do you have a lot of things to deal with over there? Yeah. Of course Luonan knew that the so-called over there referred to the society and even the inner world. Normally at home, this was a topic that everyone was well aware of but tacitly didn't touch upon. Luonan really didn't know how to respond when it was suddenly brought up today. Fortunately, Luo Shuqing did not need Luonan to make up any more excuses or lies. She had her own observations and judgments. I can guess that you've done quite well over there. Your uncle and I haven't given you any help, but you've been able to drag out the matter of skipping classes until today. And you've done it in this manner. Don't look at your uncle just because he's in the SCA. I'm afraid that even if he sold his old face, he wouldn't be able to do a better job than this. What could Luonan say? With great difficulty, he swallowed back the stupid words of "Aunt, you're too kind." He could only shut his mouth tightly and listen obediently. The problem was that Luo Shuqing only said this and didn't say anything else. Luonan wanted to ask but he didn't dare to. His belly full of suspicions was stifled to the point of being uncomfortable. It wasn't until he walked another 100 steps that he heard his aunt speak softly, "About the suspension, I'll go back and discuss it with your uncle, okay?" When it came to Luonan's studies, Mrs. Luo Shuqing had never used such an uncertain tone to converse with him like she did today. Luonan was stupefied for a moment. Then he felt the heavy pressure of making a choice. He was actually speechless for a time. The two didn't take the trolley bus. They walked to the underground parking lot. Halfway there, Luonan was really unable to resist this overly oppressive atmosphere. He just wanted to say something, but when the words reached his mouth, a sentence suddenly jumped out. "Aunt, do you know of Wu Jun?" "Huh." Luonan was a bit regretful as soon as the words left his mouth. The matter that happened to Ling Chen occupied far too much of his brain. Aside from the conflict between the Amaterasu Order and the Xia Luo Order over the Holy Cloak, there were also the words that Luonan was extremely sensitive to in the conversation between Yen Fun and Zhang Luan. Things like crazy old man, graduate student, suspension, and so on. Luonan couldn't help but think of something. It was just that he knew very little about the events of the past. His interpersonal relationships were even more muddled. He resisted the urge to ask in detail when he was in the karst cave for the sake of maintaining his cool and for the convenience of monitoring in the future. After returning to Xia City, he circled around inside and out. It seemed that his aunt was the only person he could ask a thing or two about. Even so, it wasn't good to mention this, right? Luonan was unable to explain the logic behind his question. Luo Shuqing turned to look at him just as he was feeling awkward. "Wu Jun." "Which Wu Jun?" Luonan gaped, unable to speak for a time. Was he supposed to say, the priestess of the Xia Luo Order? The female owner of the machine modification shop in the black market exchange in the U-Hole far away in Spring City? Luckily, his current thinking speed far exceeded that of normal people. He immediately captured the astonished emotions behind his aunt's words. So he was just stifled for a moment before he quickly asked back, "I'm talking about that graduate student." Luonan deliberately blurred out a few words in the middle. In the end, he ended with accurate and truthful information. Reality proved that his methods were very successful. Mrs. Luo Shuqing immediately filled in the blanks with her imagination. Her brows furrowed slightly. "You saw Wu Jun? When did she return to Xia City?" "Oh my, there's actually a way." Luonan still wanted to confirm things. He spoke cautiously, "That Mrs. Wu. She's my grandfather's graduate student. Did she stay in the wilderness for many years?" "Yes." "Wu Jun was recommended to your grandfather's laboratory in the year 75, right after your parents. She was only 20 years old at the time. She was still a silly little girl." "Where did you see her? Was it a chance encounter or did she come looking for you?" Luo Nan felt that his aunt was quite nervous and he was suspicious. Was it because she knew of Wu Jun's current identity? Or was there some other sensitive situation that she didn't want him to know about? Luo Nan pondered in his mind, but he still spoke half-truths and half-lies. I've never seen her before. I just heard about her from someone else's mouth. I just asked in passing. Who told you? It was senior sister Tianxi. She's the one who went on a blind date with third brother Emochio. In the end it didn't work out. Right now she's a graduate student of Professor Pan, one of the Institute of Architecture and Design. You seem to have met her some time ago. Luo Shuqing had a bit of an impression. She nodded and let out a breath of relief subconsciously. Indeed. Professor Pan's younger brother, Dr. Panda, helped to evaluate and recommend the group of graduate students that went to the wilderness back then. You're quite familiar with that senior sister Tian? You're even talking about these old matters. Professor Pan likes to talk the most, especially about things related to my mother. Senior sister Tian is influenced by the company she keeps. She usually divulges a bit of information to me. Luo Nan laughed innocently and immediately said, speaking of which, was that Mrs. Wu always in the wilderness? Back then our family's laboratory was already gone. What was she doing over there? Luo Shuqing laughed involuntarily. She graduated in 81. When the accident happened in the lab in 83, she had nearly 10 years of work experience. There were many large companies that wanted to recruit her. Really? Right now, Wu Jun didn't look like she was being recruited by a large company. Luo Nan felt that his aunt seemed to be avoiding some information. He immediately asked, You're so clear about this matter. Has Wu Jun always been in contact with our family? No. We haven't seen each other in many years. Oh? How long has it been? It's been around 6 or 7 years. The last time I saw her was around 90 years ago. Huh. I should be able to remember things back then. How come I don't have any impression of her at all? She doesn't come often. She just comes every 1 or 2 years to see your grandfather and understand his condition. She goes straight to the sanatorium. How could there be such a coincidence? Hey, why do you have so many questions? Do you have bad intentions in your stomach? How could that be? Luo Nan understood that it would be very difficult to get any more information from his aunt for the time being. And the things he knew right now were quite valuable. 90 years. This time period was extremely sensitive to Luo Nan. This was because it was from that year that he began to refer to his grandfather's notes. He began to research formatting theory without any hesitation. It was also in that year that Yen Hong's academic misconduct came to light. Quantum Corporation's Deep Blue platform began its trial operation. Of course, the last time his father showed his face and gave him the flexible e-ink screen with the external neuron was also in the same year. If the time and background were shifted to Wu Jun's side, well, Polio would be around 5 or 6 years old. It was as Yenfen said. Wu Jun was forced to take over when she was pregnant. This should have happened around this time. Luo Nan suddenly stood there stupidly. His mind churned with a rather absurd thought. Then it got out of hand. Wait. Wasn't he thinking too much? A human's thought process was like this. A sudden association was able to forcefully knead two matters that were separated by thousands of miles. It was similar to a montage style of editing, forming an inconceivable effect. Luo Nan was currently carrying out an inappropriate association. Before a certain person disappeared, Wu Jun maintained contact with her family. After she disappeared, she didn't come back. At the same time, around the time of her disappearance, Wu Jun became pregnant. Mother **her. Luo Nan fiercely smacked his forehead. They had already entered the underground parking lot. The sound of this slap was extremely loud and clear in this relatively enclosed space. Luo Shuqing looked at him in astonishment. Luo Nan came to a realization and hurriedly suppressed the absurd thoughts in his mind. He revealed a smile to his aunt. It's nothing. It's nothing. I was just a bit stupid. You really were stupid. Luo Shuqing's anger was finally provoked. She glared at him fiercely and quickly walked to the side of the car. She sat in the driver's seat first. Luo Nan lowered his head and sat in the front passenger seat. He had a remorseful expression. Actually, he had already logged onto the psychic wave network. He used the xianxia to communicate with others. Of course, he could only send a message, urgent. Reply when I see the message. Approximately 2 minutes later, when the car was on the high-speed magnetic track heading home, the other side finally responded, You were in such a hurry that I dropped my test tube. Boss Luo, what are your orders? Bro Octopus, I have a bit of skin tissue from last night. Can we do a paternity test with this? Did you bring hair follicles? I did. Chapter 723. Nanster, did you kill someone? I didn't. But you messed up. I didn't. Then why did you do a paternity test? I did a paternity test for different mothers. Then it was your dad messing around. Believe it or not, I'll really kill someone. Luo Nan had to endure the wild bombardment of friends and family on the psychic wave network from evening to after dinner. There was also a family meeting about taking a leave of absence from school in the middle. He was mentally and physically exhausted before 9 o'clock. He just wanted to cover his head and sleep when he returned to his room. The aftereffects of the situation continued to spread. According to Bamboo Pole's estimates, by tomorrow morning, news of the proponent of the cage and configuration theory, the mental side genius Professor Luo Nan conducting a secret paternity test and suspected of having an illegitimate child would fill all the major forums, discussion groups, tabloids, and other platforms of the inner world. It would become one of the hottest topics of conversation in the inner world. The culprit, Octopus, was in a stupefied state. He was quite unlucky. When Luo Nan contacted him, he was working as a volunteer in the branch's biological laboratory. He was being exploited. He was so busy that his brain was a bit desensitized. From what he saw at the time, Luo Nan's request was too simple. Any assistant would be able to handle it. So he really did hand this matter over to his assistant. There was even a sampling service. And so, the beautiful and cute Miss Assistant, who had a screw loose in her head and a slightly wide lip structure, was driving to Luo Nan's house when the news completely exploded. In a sense, this was a very serious leak. It was said that Yuan had dragged Octopus off the laboratory table and thrown him into the interrogation room. Then Octopus used the room as a refuge. He crouched down holding his head and refused to come out. The problem was that Luo Nan was several dozen kilometers away, staring coldly at him. Luo Nan was considering whether or not he should give Octopus a taste of heaven's punishment. In the end, Luo Nan held himself back. He didn't want this big news to get out. He could only force himself to concentrate and think about matters related to the Xiaoluo sect. Even though the paternity test results had yet to come out, Luo Nan could confirm that this tiny sect had a very close relationship with his grandfather and the wilderness laboratory of yesteryear. Wu Jun, the high priestess of the church, was his grandfather's graduate student. They had worked together in the laboratory for many years. Even after the accident in the laboratory, they still kept in touch. It was a small order that was closely related to their family. It had endured for so many years, stumbling and stumbling. Not to mention the story behind it, just its existence alone was enough for Luo Nan to pay considerable attention to it. Especially when they were facing a huge problem. It was not just the Amaterasu cult. It seemed like the foundation of their cult was in trouble as well. A cloak. That's right. His grandfather had said the word cloak more than once, but Luo Nan had always believed that the so-called cloak should correspond to the curtains of developer mode on the mental plane. In other words, it was the scene of a myriad of overlapping curtains when Luo Nan first used clairvoyance on the mental plane. So there's a real thing? Luo Nan was truly a bit confused. At the same time, he grew more and more curious. He hated that he couldn't immediately meet First Ablatum Wu Jun and get to the bottom of things. Unfortunately, they had missed the opportunity this time, and according to Yen Fun, that person wouldn't be back in a short period of time. Tieske, I actually forgot to ask for his contact information. Of course, even if I had asked for it back then, Yenfen probably wouldn't have given it to me. I'm just observing for now. Yenfen will certainly have to give me an explanation after such a huge change happened in my family. But according to her, Wu Jun went to the wilderness and was part of the Order's secret operation. It's basically impossible for her to use a satellite phone, a tool that exposes her target. Communication between the two sides is pretty much cut off. Luo Nan casually grabbed the flexible e-ink screen and wrote and drew on it. He pondered over how to quickly lock onto and contact Wu Jun. The Xiaoluo Order might have a method of contacting the extraordinary pathway, but the possibility isn't high. After all, their strength looks quite impressive. Even Yen Fin, a high-level existence, only has a C-rank fleshly body. Then I'll just have to use the stupid method. I'll just search the entire world. Where there was demand, there was motivation. Luo Nan knew how difficult it was to advance, and he quickly came up with an action plan with his own characteristics. The virtual brain system has a ready-made algorithm for recognizing facial features. Finding Wu Jun's photo and information is far too easy. I can see it right now. Though it consumes quite a lot of resources, I can treat it as an in-depth training in big data processing. I can still use it when I get back to the Cloud Mist Labyrinth. Oh, I need to use ready-made resources. Wu Jun isn't a vagrant of the wilderness. She's a legal citizen with an account in the social authority system. I can ask Sister Yuan to help me search for her recent whereabouts. She'll most likely leave traces as long as she passes through a city. But the problem lies in the fact that if Wu Jun is carrying out a secret operation, the possibility of her disguise is quite high. She'll also pay attention to avoid the area covered by authority. A simple search based on facial features and authority won't be very useful. This will be quite troublesome. The characteristics of the form, soul, and energy were the best to touch upon the essence. Luonan stopped writing and sighed. Perhaps he was still too anxious. If he continued to toss and turn like this, it would take at least a week. He would consume a large amount of strength every day, and it was very likely that he would do useless work. He didn't forget that the most pressing task right now was to get used to the biochemical reactor he brought back from Spring City as soon as possible. He needed to erase the hidden dangers of the cloud world as soon as possible. Oh, look at what I've drawn. Right now on the flexible e-ink screen, there was a list of simplified steps and keywords to take note of. There was a schematic diagram of the algorithm needed for a global search. There was a basic outline of Wu Jun's store that was being monitored from 2,000 kilometers away. In addition, there were also some lines that outlined a somewhat fuzzy portrait of a person in the center of the drawing interface. This was a woman. She had short hair and a thin face. She wore rather large work clothes. Her body was half squatting and half kneeling in the drawing. She leaned close to the outline of a machine. She even held a repair tool in her hand. She was like a blue-collar worker, but she had a rather weak appearance. The first thing Luonan could confirm was that he had never seen this person before. Regardless of appearance or temperament, she was very unfamiliar. But soon he confirmed that this woman who had suddenly appeared in the center of the drawing interface was none other than the Wu Jun he was looking for. How did I draw it? It's like this. Luonan quickly came to a realization. This sketch was something he found in an electronic photo frame placed in his bedroom when he was observing Wu Jun's store from afar. Then he unconsciously reproduced it. Luonan's work was a bit different when compared to the finalized photo. It looked like there was more meaning to it than in the photo. This didn't seem to be just a result of his black and white art style. Luonan was a bit surprised by the results of his own creation. But his current thinking and knowledge were far from what it was like when he first entered the profession. He stared at the sketch drawing and analyzed it in detail for a moment. He was certain in his heart, yes. I specifically talked about this when I was discussing with Mr. Bai and the others about entering dreams, divination, and other psychic techniques. This is the magnetization effect. It was just like how non-magnetic materials could obtain magnetism if they were placed in a strong magnetic field for a long time. A person would also form an effect similar to magnetization if they lived in the environment for a long time. From a rational perspective, the result of magnetization was the hair, fingerprints, utensils, trash, and other traces left behind in the target's life. Outstanding criminal investigators and profilers could use these clues to piece together a relatively complete image. This included emotions, temperament, lifestyle habits, preferences, and so on. But from a psychic's perspective, these objective traces could be absorbed by their special clairvoyance mode, which was filled with personal colors. Then they could be reorganized and restored to a more intuitive image of material and even an answer. The inner world called this the magnetization effect of a spiritual magnetic field. It was a terrible description that was filled with pseudoscience. Luonan was more willing to call it the interference of the spiritual core. This was a term he translated from the virtual brain system. It couldn't be called sincere and elegant. And with Wu Jun's situation, she was basically unable to reach the level of Luonan and Mrs. Halder, who had formed a clear and distinct core of concept, the level of the spirit-binding core. But being able to place everyone under the same standard and conduct a more intuitive comparison was always more in line with the human mode of thinking. It looked like Luonan's condition today was quite good. Then it wouldn't be a bad idea to try psychic. In a certain sense, this was a shortcut for Ruewen to traverse through space. She could cross over. The digital pen in Luonan's hand drew on the flexible screen's work area. He tried to add a new element to this work, a more directional element. Maybe the cloak would be good? It was as if a myriad of curtains crisscrossed and flew in the air before Luonan's eyes. They extended into the boundless depths, forming a marvelous scene that Luonan jokingly called developer mode. Of course, this scene had a deeper level of meaning, but Luonan didn't need to analyze it right now. He just treated it as a kind of creative element, trying to add it to the sketch work that was nearing completion. A clear purpose formed a kind of stimulation, causing Luonan's thoughts and emotions to diverge. he connected them in a series of disturbances. An even deeper and more complex scene was excavated from the memories of his brain. At the same time, it was excavated from the 500 million square kilometers of land and sea, the tens of billions of humans, and the tens of billions of species of life. Objective facts, subjective emotions, simple desires, complex thoughts. Everything formed a sea of information that was enough to crash the brain of any powerful individual. Even though Luonan had the external neuron to protect his body and the virtual brain system to keep watch, he wouldn't take the risk to do some analysis. He just relied on his intuition and a few willful emotions that were close to his aesthetics. He picked a few characteristic points at random and used them as a foundation to draw a silhouette of the modeled sea of information. The digital pen finally dropped down. In a short few seconds, Wu Jun's portrait, which was already a bit fuzzy in the drawing area, was nearly completely hidden under the shadows of the simulated ink. It was as if it was submerged by the surging waves of the sea under the curtain of night. Chapter 724. Ocean Waves. Ocean. This was a concept with practical significance. Luonan used such a marvelous method to grasp the first fragment of rational significance from the intuitive information of the primal chaos. The electronic pen paused for a moment, then it spun on Luonan's fingertips. With this spin, the entire world sensing network of 500 million square kilometers shrunk by a third. The source of information provided by the billions of humans and billions of living beings was cut off by at least half. Of course, what remained was an enormous amount of information. It was mottled and turbid. There were no meaningful details that could be described. But Luonan's choice created some sort of direction for them. It was no longer a vast expanse of haze. Instead, it flowed, forming a general direction and trajectory. In this stage, the information directly gathered from the material plane of reality naturally retreated to a supporting position. And the subjective information that went through the perception, thought, and processing of humans and other living beings formed a torrential turbid flow that surged forth. The turbid flow did not flow in the direction of north, south, east, or west. It did not surge up and down. Instead, it followed the special dimension of the human heart. It rushed forward under the relatively restricted external environmental conditions. It was also at this stage that the guiding strength of the virtual brain system's rules toward Luonan weakened. The wraith sign in the depths of the void spontaneously leaped out, wantonly swimming within the turbid flow of the human heart. Luonan's eyebrows jumped lightly. If this were 4 months ago, he would not have furrowed his brows no matter how the wraith sign leaped. But after discovering the abyssal sun disk, Luonan could not help but ponder every time the wraith sign acted spontaneously. Then again there was no point in pondering. Could Luonan shield himself from the influence of the abyssal sun? The answer was no. In reality, Luonan had endured the heat conduction of the abyssal sun disk every moment of the past 4 months. Although he would ignore this heat conduction most of the time due to the difference in degree, this objective fact existed on the subjective mental plane. It still existed in a powerful anchoring manner. This was especially true when Luonan temporarily abandoned the virtual brain system to explore the mysteries of the turbid flow of the human heart. This influence was even more direct. In this sense, Luonan had taken the initiative to step into the domain of the abyssal sun disk. He went to observe and learn the rules and laws that affected the control of emotions and desires. Since that was the case, there was nothing more to say. Luonan's subtle state of mind was like a drop of water thrown into the sun. It evaporated without a trace in an instant. Correspondingly, he calmly accepted the heat that came from the abyss sun wheel. He went a step further to experience the vague laws behind the heat. It was at this moment that a great sun leapt out of the boundless turbid ocean, radiating scorching light and heat, as well as even more penetrative and even destructive power to every level of the turbid ocean in the human heart. Some emotions and desires were instantly vaporized. Some were blown into pieces and lost all meaning on all levels. However, there were still some that, under the bombardment of stimulating energy, revealed information that was previously hidden even deeper. The turbid currents, which had been chaotic in the first place, became even more chaotic. However, under the powerful blast of the abyss sun wheel, the meaningless and low-level information was almost wiped out. What was left was the marvelous water plants and floating objects. Hiss. Cat Eyes woke up from her nightmare once more. The shadow of the human-faced arachnid was annihilated within the brilliant sun disk. However, the crisscrossing chains became even more twisted and taut. There was even a chain that clutched her neck, dragging her along with the vast and boundless chains and spiderweb into the depths of the turbid current. The spiderweb forcefully churned within the turbid current, entangling countless impurities and trash. Of course, there were some catches that Cat Eyes could not understand. She herself was one of the catches. She had long since been bound to it, unable to escape. And no matter how much Cat Eyes struggled within the turbid flow, no matter how deep she was pulled, the intense light and heat that came from the brilliant sunwheel would always envelop her. It reached far and wide and pervasive. It increased the temperature layer by layer, causing her already extremely fragile willpower to distort, collapse, and boil over together with the impatient emotions at the bottom of her heart. During this process, Cat Eyes felt Luonan's gaze. It was not focused on her. Instead, it was focused on all things within the turbid ocean. It was focused on all the distorted and fragmented images and information. Therefore, his gaze was dignified and cold. It blended together with the powerful light of the sun disk, dictating the life and death of all things within the turbid ocean. He was aloof and remote like a god. Cat Eyes was unfortunate. This was because she understood the source of all unforeseen events more clearly than the ignorant existences around her. Therefore, she was the equivalent of looking directly at a god. She endured an even deeper level of destructive pressure. However, Cat Eyes was fortunate. At the very least, she was within the scope of the rules of this grand system. She was close to a god, possessing a bit of the right to pray or beg. Huff, huff. Cat Eyes' breathing was still heavy for a long time after she woke up. It was the same as every time after a nightmare. Her clothes were completely drenched, and the bedsheet beneath her was not able to escape from misfortune. A large amount of heat was lost, and the mental exhaustion was 10 times, 100 times greater. It caused her to hover on the brink of collapse. She wasn't even willing to get up. She just raised her eyelids with great difficulty and looked at the ceiling. Her vision was completely unfocused. Instead, Yuan's words from the early hours of the morning echoed in her ears. He is currently probing the world. What he probed out was a storm that stirred the world. That wasn't stirring. It was a calamity. Unknowingly, the angle of the sunlight from the outside world had shifted. It shone through the gap in the curtains and fell on the end of the bed, forming a bright edge of light. It also lightly stuck to her smooth calves, bringing a slight warmth. Cat Eyes instinctively twitched. Her calves shrunk back. She could not help but recall the reality of her nightmare, the memory of being illuminated by the radiant sun. Unfathomable and pervasive. It was easy to find adjectives, but the experience of being penetrated, of being peeled open, of having no privacy from the inside to the outside, of having no cover at all. Even the most basic of self-esteem was unbearable. You bastard who bites the hand that feeds you. Cat Eye's little favorable impression of Luonan had only been separated by 2 nights, but it had turned to ashes under the roasting of the sunlight. Of course, she definitely would not keep these words bottled up in her heart. Cat Eyes simply dialed Luonan's hexier number, threw these words over, and hung up in an instant. Luonan responded in an instant, taking the initiative to call back. Sister Cat Eyes, are you okay? Even though it was the psychic wave network, there were some things that could not be said too clearly on this public line. Cat Eyes responded snappily, don't bother me. Then she hung up. Luonan was well behaved. His revenge was basically a success. But why was it that his revenge, which was supposed to be a form of venting, carried with it a wondrous fear, excitement, and even an inflated sense of accomplishment? Bastard. Cat Eyes cursed once more. She pounded the bed, but in the end she still crawled up. She fiercely pulled the curtains tight, not letting a single bit of light leak through. Only then did she go and freshen up. A hot bath really did help soothe the mind. Cat Eyes at least had the appetite to eat breakfast by the time she came out of the bathroom. She also skimmed through the news in passing. There were no surprises. Aside from 2 or 3 authoritative news platforms that maintained a bit of modesty, the various media apps, forums, and discussion groups of all sizes of the inner world had already been overrun by gossip such as, Luonan secretly did a paternity test, or became a father at 16. The corner of Cat Eye's lips twitched, but she still did not laugh. As for why she noticed it, it was because Luonan had deliberately marked this silhouette. It looked like only the innermost side of the room was a little old man who happened to be facing the outside. He winked at her and bared his teeth. Cat Eyes responded with a wink. She casually pointed to the bar counter beside her, indicating that they should each do their own thing. The stooped, lazy, and spiritless little old man was none other than Xia City's branch's veteran B-rank psychic. At the same time he was also an expert in soul studies, Mr. Bai. They were all acquaintances and friends. The more it was like this, the more they would pay attention to protecting each other's privacy. Under such circumstances, a simple greeting was enough. On the other hand, the person sitting opposite Mr. White deliberately turned his head and looked at them a few times. Cat Eyes only felt that the fellow looked familiar, but she couldn't recall who he was for a moment. She simply ignored him. She then sat in front of the bar counter. Blood energy refill. This was both a consumption and a secret signal. Using an expensive drink like blood energy that required honor points indicated that I needed high-end services from the inner world. In the Wild Inn, such high-end services were usually information. As for refill, it indicated that I had an account here. I also made an appointment. The purpose was clear. Don't try to fool me with low-end stuff. The bartender revealed a professional smile. He quickly took out a sealed cup of blood energy from the expensive and sturdy safe beside him and placed it on a tray. Aside from the blood energy, there was also a small flexible screen on the tray. A series of items were listed on the screen. Cat Eyes finished scanning the items on the flexible screen in the time it took her to open the packaging. She then rolled her eyes. You guys are going to go bankrupt here, right? The time to make an appointment is a bit short. I understand that you didn't make enough preparations, but you don't need to use information from a week ago to trick me. Also, you can count these 2 small dinghies as cruises. Can your family's cruises enter an underground river? The bartender's professional smile crumbled a bit. He didn't wait for Cat Eyes to respond when a figure came over and knocked on the counter, indicating for the bartender to get lost. Don't embarrass yourself here. Consider today's pay your training fee. Go work hard. The bartender was a bit stunned. Young Master Zong? Go go go. I'm going to chat with my friend. As he spoke, the person who just came over laughed and greeted, Oh my little cat, long time no see. You just came out of the hospital. Did you get your alimony payment? It was this fellow who had been talking with Mr. Bai just now. He even turned his head to size her up. Cat Eyes lifted her eyelids and swept her gaze over the person's face twice. She finally remembered who this round-faced and slightly plump brother was. She didn't say anything. She picked up the blood energy drink and flipped her hand to pour it over. Holy crap. That person suddenly flipped over. His figure could barely be considered nimble, but he was still splashed on his shoulder and the corner of his head by the drink worth 2 honor points. He cut an extremely sorry figure for a time. Cat Eyes didn't follow up with an attack. She only said, It's yours. It's mine, it's mine. It's mine. That person accepted the towel the waitress handed over. He hastily wiped his face twice and was willing to accept his punishment. Someone who could speak to Cat Eyes like this was indeed an acquaintance. He could barely be considered a friend. Young Master Zong's name was Xuanhuan. He was also a registered member of the Xia City branch. Plus he had a good father. He was one of the branch's 3B rank fleshly bodies. He was the combat master Mr. Zongji, who was famous for his perfect rotation. Although Xuanhuan had learned from his family, Xuanhuan was a wanderer. He didn't have many accomplishments in the field of combat techniques. He stumbled and barely crossed the C-rank barrier. He had an identity in the society, so he put all his enthusiasm into the world of sensual pleasures. He flew all over the world all year round. He spent very little time in Xia City. Alright, back in the day this brother also chased after Cat Eyes. But one time, as an assistant, he personally demonstrated the magic of being pierced through the anus by a flying needle. After that, he kept a respectful distance from Cat Eyes. Please forgive me for today's matter. Last time, that baze from the Order of Justice went crazy with alcohol. He brought a bunch of people and pretty much massacred this place. The experienced ones either died or fled. We, the ones who took over, were helpless. Cat Eyes raised an eyebrow. You're here, little boss. Little boss. Participate in the stock market for fun. Let my old man feel at ease. Oh, then I wish you good fortune. Cat Eyes swept her gaze over the simple and crude furnishings of the cave. She gave him some auspicious words without any sincerity. Playing in this area of Xia City is a small business. It doesn't have much of a future. I'm counting on my old friend to take care of me. Xuanhuan fawningly delivered 2 cups of blood energy. Of course it was free. If it weren't for my old man getting angry, I wouldn't have invested this money in Xia City even if you beat me to death. If I had the spare time I could have run to Ban City, T City, or Luo City and invested in a small shop. As long as I could make money from both sides, I might be able to shake it up in 2 years. But here, when I think of the 3 heavyweights and Professor Luo, I tremble. My heart trembles. Cat Eyes picked up the cup and faintly smiled. This was also a vagabond trading house. Disregarding the 3 typical examples that Xuanhuan had mentioned. It was not without reason that Spring City had become a market, but this place was a wild inn. The vast majority of vagabond trading houses made money, including the Wild Inn. But this sort of black market that wandered on the fringes of multi-layered society inevitably faced a considerable degree of competition. Its greatest competitor was the internal resource market of the ability user associations and other inner world organizations. Within a large metropolitan area, the ability user associations, secret orders, and other large organizations didn't need to look at reports or look at industries. They only needed to look at whether or not the vagabond trading houses and similar black markets in the vicinity were flourishing or not. The relationship between the two was clearly inversely proportional. At the very least, at the extraordinary level, the more resources a branch of the society or secret orders controlled, the stronger their control over the city, and the smaller the space for the black market to survive. On the other hand, if the large organizations were poorly managed or intentionally connived, or if there were many organizations competing and keeping each other in check, the black market would have the opportunity to expand wantonly. Ban City, which was filled with all sorts of religious sects, T-City, which was known as the paradise for maritime explorers, and Luo City, which was a tax haven, were all in such a situation. And in Xia City, where the 3 heavyweights were keeping watch, and Professor Luo had appeared out of nowhere, the Wild Inn was destined to only be a single auxiliary function of selling information and transferring supplies. It could only help a limited number of people become rich. On the level of benefits, as soon as the word limited appeared, the foot of the inn would often be smeared with deathly white brains. The Wild Inn had already changed owners 7 times in recent years. The most recent one was the Bays Massacre, that Zhong Ming spoke of. It happened not too long ago at the end of last year. It was closely related to the 2 out of 1,000 young miss incident that caused the inner world to become restless. It could be considered to be related to Luo Nan to a certain extent. Cat Eyes recalled her mission when she thought of Luo Nan. She casually pushed the tray and the flexible screen in front of Zhong Ming. Taking care of the business isn't a problem. Now is the time to use you guys. I've already deducted 10 points. Now it's up to you. Yes. Sister Cat will definitely give me a chance to make up for it. Zhong Ming's business attributes were off the charts. He picked up the flexible screen and gave it a few glances. Then he moved to open up the database, preparing to change the information entry. Cat Eyes was a particular person. She understood the order of arrival. She knocked on the bar counter. Mr. Bai is still over there. It's nothing. I'm just helping Blackheart Salt pass on a message. I'm bringing a gift or something. It's awkward for my own people, so I won't get involved. Hey, do you think Mr. Bai can't hear you? Cat Eyes also knew that the Bai and Zhong families were old friends. They had their own ways of getting along, so she didn't need to worry about it. She nodded and raised her cup towards Mr. Bai from afar. This could be considered complete etiquette. Mr. Bai chuckled and waved his hand in response. He didn't look awkward at all. Zhong Ming had just entered the business not too long ago, but his business abilities were decent. He quickly deleted the useless entries on the flexible screen and added many more. He returned it to Cat Eyes. Actually, your conditions are a bit vague. Everyone knows that it's convenient on the sea, but there are far too many similar activities. The ones I picked were all of a scale and style. But you also know that these kinds of activities usually have qualifications. You can't participate just because you want to. Cat Eyes grunted twice and looked at the introduction seriously. Zhong Ming snapped his fingers again. This project can't be waived. But seeing that we're old friends, I'll give you another one for free. This is a project that our group of people worked on. The environment, style, and the goods. They're all pretty good. Zhong Ming lowered his voice and moved closer to speak the last sentence. Chapter 726. Look, it's this ship, the Jade Light. It's basically confirmed to set sail from Ban City next month. It will cross the Pacific Ocean and pass through 5 large metropolitan areas before finally arriving at Luo City. During this time, there will be all sorts of large-scale activities, performances, auctions, fights, gambling, and everything else. Zhong Miao projected an aerial photo of a large cruise ship, the Jade Light, a humpback whale-class mothership cruise ship. 450 meters long, 52 meters wide, 22 decks, top speed 40 knots. It can carry over 15,000 people. The interior has its own dock and can park private yachts. The top deck can take off and land medium-sized fixed-wing aircraft. The cost is close to 3 billion. This was originally Wang Yu's private property, but it was recently donated to the Jade Inspection Society to be used as an event venue. Cat Eye's eyelids twitched when she heard the word aircraft. She cast her gaze towards the aerial photo. She circled around the luxurious business jet parked on the top deck. She really wanted to ask if there were any other angles, but in the end she asked about another matter. Wang Yu? Jade Inspection Society? This is a small organization established by a group of us. It's similar to the Brotherhood. Look, my name, Yu, means beautiful jade, right? And Wang Yu, his name is the same. It's probably a coincidence. Everyone came together and hit it off. You and Wang Yu? Can you reach them? Don't say that Cat Eyes looked down on others. Wang Yu's name wasn't special, but there was probably only one Wang Yu in the world who could casually donate a luxury cruise ship worth 2 billion. She was the chairman of Jadeite Investment, one of the largest private shareholders of Quantum Corporation, and possibly the most powerful youth in the world. Don't even talk about Zhong Miao. Even Zhong Miao's father, a veteran B-rank powerhouse and a combat master, Zhong Miao, was an unreachable distance away from her. Hey you. Don't hit my face when you hit me. Zhong Miao's tone was raised at first, then suppressed. In the end, he could only respond with a mischievous smile. I can't be mentioned in the same breath as Wang Yu, but it's not like the difference between heaven and earth. Look, Blackheart Salt is her girlfriend. I grew up wearing the same pants as her, so why can't I reach her? Ha! Zhong Ji also realized that he had made a slip of the tongue. He didn't even dare to turn around to look at Mr. White's old face. He smiled awkwardly and sped up. I have a lot of information here. I'll send you the event app. There will be real-time updates about the performances and the items to be auctioned. You can take a look. I have something to do, so I'll be leaving first. Saying this, Zhong Yun hurriedly went to hide. Mr. White didn't kill him on the spot, and Cat Eyes didn't care about the fate of the surnamed Zhong at all. She just sat quietly in front of the bar, waiting for the relevant information to be sent to her. She looked through it one by one. This was especially so for the pictures of the Emerald Light. After 5 minutes of picking and choosing, she finally found one that felt most similar to the Emerald Light among the hundreds of pictures. After making some adjustments, she formed a silhouette effect and pieced it together with the psychic picture in her hand. After a simple zooming process, the silhouette that was converted from a real-life photo successfully replaced the relatively blurry shadow of the cruise on the psychic map. It was almost perfect. This result, Cat Eyes didn't hesitate at all. She sent Luo Nan the comparison diagram and the relevant information regarding the Jadeite light to Luo Nan. Mission complete. She did it in a straightforward and efficient manner. It was simply like the originally expensive cup of blood energy that was now free. She drank the expensive drink that was worth 2 honor points in a single gulp. The warm flow of nourishing energy entered her throat, and great waves surged from the bottom of her heart. Why was it so simple? Why was it so coincidental? Cat Eyes had long felt that Luo Nan's decision to hand this matter over to her was a rather strange one. In terms of intelligence gathering ability, even if Cat Eyes were to fly a plane, she still wouldn't be able to catch up to He Yuan, who specialized in her field and controlled a large number of channels. What did it mean that it was inconvenient to involve the black market? This sort of reason was completely untenable when she thought about it in detail. Did the sources of intelligence still have to be legal and formal? But the truth was that Luo Nan had forcefully assigned the mission to her. He wanted her to go to the black market to search for clues. Not long after she arrived at the Wild Inn, she bumped into Zhong Yun, an old acquaintance. Zhong Yun just so happened to give her accurate information. Zhong Yun certainly didn't know anything about the cause and effect of the entire matter. He just acted according to his usual temperament and personality. He embodied the friendship of a businessman, nothing more. The series of circumstances in the Wild Inn completely conformed to the chain of logic at the time. There was nothing awkward about it at all. But as she replayed the events in her mind, Cat Eyes felt as if she was on an interior stage called the Wild Inn. She and everyone present had performed a play called Intelligence Gathering together. Every single person on the stage was a movie king with off-the-charts acting skills. The entire play was completed in a single breath. It flowed down in a continuous stream. Not a single trace of a performance could be seen. Perhaps she had drunk too much blood energy. She felt a bit intoxicated. Cat Eyes was in a daze for a time. She couldn't differentiate between reality and illusion. She subconsciously supported herself on the bar counter and stood up. She prepared to walk out. It was at this moment that a slight stimulation from the outside world caused her to fiercely wake up. She turned her head to look and just happened to meet Mr. Bai's puzzled gaze. "Oh, Cat Eyes, you're going back just like that?" Cat Eyes stood still. In the end, the experiences of last night, now, and even the recent period of time had caused her some trouble. It was impossible for her to go see a psychiatrist. However, when she coincidentally met an expert in a related field, the preset obstacles were naturally erased. She hesitated for a moment before walking over to the private room. "Mr. Bai, are you looking for someone to drink a few cups with?" Mr. Bai cheerfully extended his hand and gestured for Cat Eyes to sit. Come. We're all drinkers. A few cups is just right. You're not like that little bastard Xuanhuan. He's slippery to the point where he can't even touch his hands. I'm afraid the old Zong died with everlasting regret." Cat Eyes found a waiter and ordered 2 bottles of wine. She poured Mr. Bai's wine, but as she was pouring the wine, she heard Mr. Bai sigh. "Big brother, don't laugh at second brother. There's still someone who died with everlasting regret." Clearly Mr. Bai was talking about his own daughter, Bai Xinyan, who worked for Quantum Corporation and held a high position. Bai Xinyan was a very complicated woman. She had traveled tens of thousands of miles to treat Luonan. Their relationship was quite good for a time, but she was also the biggest driving force behind the 2000s of a girl incident. It was just a semi-rumor, but it set off an enormous storm. It nearly caused the power balance of the inner world to collapse. Cat Eyes and Bai Xinyan's friendship was mediocre, so there was no need for her to make any comments. Mr. Bai also did not want to complain to her. He smiled and rubbed against the hot topic. "I don't see you breathing a sigh of relief after the DNA report came out. It's not easy to clear up the misunderstanding." He was clearly talking about Luonan's paternity test. The smile on Cat Eye's lips was a bit cold and cynical. Actually, she had always believed that Luonan's actions were far more vile than people could imagine for a woman who possessed an independent spirit. However, she was the one who courted death first. Luonan's subjective lack of intent caused the entire matter to become vague and unclear. The current problem was the current Luonan, a powerful person who could wander in and out and control the will of others? Was he really still a muddled youth? Cat Eyes could not see it. Misunderstandings are very normal. Even if you look at the child with your own eyes, sometimes you can't even feel that it's your own flesh and blood. Let alone outsiders who are completely unaware. Mr. Bai drank a large mouthful of chicken soup for the soul, but the one who drank the most was still himself. At the same time he poured mouthful after mouthful of the soup into his mouth. It made his figure seem all the more stooped and even pitiful. Cat Eyes did not go along with him. She did not console him. She just drank cup after cup with Mr. Bai. She waited until the little old man's mood had calmed down a bit before she said, "Mr. Bai, I want to ask for guidance. What in the world is the psychic technique?" Mr. Bai went, "Oh," and suddenly raised his head. His mind was clearly roused. "Luonan is trying to psychic again? He's drawing right? What's the situation? Do you have any works of art on hand?" Cat Eyes raised her cup. She smiled and swayed, but she did not say anything. Mr. Bai reacted. She had just asked one question and he had thrown back 4 questions in a row. This was not proper. He chuckled in amusement and poured himself another cup. This could be considered an apology. "Your boss Luo is a first-rate psychic in Xia City. You should go ask him this question." "Alright. Is he still saying that his psychic technique is just a random drawing, that he's just making up the numbers?" Cat Eyes was surprised. She immediately sneered, "This is taking advantage of him and then flaunting it. This has always been his style." Mr. Bai slapped the table and laughed out loud. This time he temporarily forgot about his vexed matters. He was in high spirits as he said, "That's right. When he said these words back then I wanted to slap him. Look at his battle achievements and psychic effects. Even old you has times where he makes mistakes. How much is his success rate? 100%. Oh, you psychics have been having quite a few gatherings these past few months. It's always been like this. It's just that Boss Luo didn't participate in the past and you didn't care, so you didn't pay attention. Speaking of psychics in Xia City, most of us have been affected by old Yu's magnetization. Our psychic senses and judgments are quite decent. We have quite a bit of talent in psychic techniques. Oh my. Counting from old Yu, me, Gao Tianxia, and Horn Demon for consecutive B-rank psychics are psychics. Oh, Her Majesty Empress Wu has a divine and heavenly disposition, so she can't be counted. Luonan is the first person who hasn't been affected by old Yu. Also, the bamboo pole can only be considered broken when it comes to him. Mr. Bai checked the name list and commented one by one. Here Old Yu is proficient in divination techniques. The tall and fierce Gao Tianshi borrows the self-hypnosis techniques of the ancient religious system. He invites the gods to possess his body. Horned Demon relies purely on his natural endowments. He plays too evil, so let's not talk about it for now. As for me, I engage in dreaming techniques on the mental plane. I construct a dreamland. Hey. Who do you think your boss Luo pays more attention to when it comes to communication? Cat Eyes didn't even need to guess. She saw the smile lines at the corner of Mr. Bai's eyes and lips. She raised her cup and toasted him. There's no need to say more about the obvious. Cheers. Mr. Bai laughed happily. Yeah, it's the two of us who get along the most. Horned Demon hasn't met him face to face, so there's no need to talk about it. Old Yu's divination technique requires a deep accumulation of traditional culture. There's also a talent requirement in the area of algebra. We aren't cut out for that. Gao Tianxi's side is pretty much the same. He's a god and he doesn't really suit his taste. Only my side picks materials on the mental plane. I also have a set of suitable special logic. I have materials and methods. Then I can design a building, arrange a labyrinth trap, put people inside, guide them, tempt them, and dig out deeper information. I can predict a more accurate possibility. Isn't it quite simple and clear? That's why we can discuss it the most. You're tuning in to the Sword Dance in the Vast Sky YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.